Today we're talking about the newest Smite data mining for patch 5.22. This one is about King Arthur and Merlin still, both of them still not released. I'm kind of expecting King Arthur to come out in the next patch. We have a lot of information on both gods now, though still a lot of the things about them are kind of blurry to say the least. But I figured it was time for an update because there's been quite a few additions since I last talked about them, as well as some other new data mining. There's been new data mining for a Baron Samedi, Daji, Hera, Izanami, Kuzenbo, and Shang Kui skin as well. The Shang Kui skin is probably known to most at this point because Hyris officially confirmed them, but we know that there are quite a few more skins coming now. There will also be an event, the Arthurian event, and if you've been paying attention to the new gods, Arthurian will be the new pantheon for King Arthur and for Merlin, so this event will tie in with their release. This event will have up to 10 quests, and it seems like they're the normal quests that you have with every event, like kind of kill that many players, do that much damage, get that much gold, or play these modes. Another rather small detail here is that there have been the first files for Season 6 Conquest in this data mining, but they didn't really show anything new yet. We know that there are going to be some changes, especially towards the solo lane in Conquest. Nothing major from what we know, but those changes are being worked on currently, obviously, because Season 6 is not that far away. And with that, let us first look at King Arthur and what we know now. So his original placeholder title was the Lawgiver, which is Tyr's title, who was a stance-swapping god as well. But we also now know that he had some references to Ullr in his kit, so maybe some of the animations for stance-swapping or similar actually belong to Ullr first. So he has multiple stances as well, and that kind of explains where these two gods come into play here. He's got some notes on what kind of character he is now. We already knew that he was going to have certain melee combos, so that was already shown by time by Hyris. So that shouldn't be anything new, the fact that he is a melee. But he also has a note that he's physical now, which should also not be a surprise to anyone, and that he's frontline. This all goes in line with him being a warrior. But it also solidifies that despite having these combos, he's still designed as a frontliner apparently. And he has two stances, we already talked about this in the past. The normal stance and what is called the Spartan stance right now. I'm not sure if that's going to be changed because Arthurian and Spartan don't really have anything to do with each other, but it might also just refer to the playstyle in these stances. With what we know now, I'm guessing that the normal stance is more of a traditional frontlining warrior style stance that has some tankiness and some damage, whereas the Spartan stance is a more aggressive stance that uses these combos more and will allow you to deal high amounts of damage and maybe sacrifice some protections in that regard, maybe somewhat similar to Achilles, but with multiple stances instead. With these stances come certain equip slots, 2 or 3 equip slots, but only one of them is different, which may mean that you can have different items as normal and as Spartan, or it could maybe be something in relation to his passive. What I think is interesting to consider here is that maybe he is not a traditional stance swapper like Ullr and Tyr, despite having the option to swap stances in that way. And maybe he's one of those characters that would rather stay in one stance for longer periods of time, which would kind of explain these different item choices, but that's yet to be found out. The two stances also have a teleport effect, but I don't think that will actually be included in his kit in that way, because from what we know about his kit so far, it doesn't seem like he would be a teleporting god. He may have something similar to a bow, arrow, or throwable axes, potentially for a distance attack. After now seeing his combo and the fact that he is Arthur and revolves around his sword mostly, I don't think he will have a secondary range stance, but he could still have some sort of range attack, maybe even involving the sword or some beam of light or whatever. Magic is not completely off the table for Arthur either, so it could be something in that regard. The first normal stance ability somehow works with this passive, and it also has a slow. The first ability in Spartan stance is a little bit different. It has a projectile hit effect, a projectile spin effect, and it somehow has ammunition and projectile fire as well. Now, the fact that it has a spin effect kind of points towards the fact that it could be one of those attacks that have a longer swing animation that has been talked about. And that would mean that the projectile may, in this context, not necessarily be a long-range projectile, so maybe something that comes from his sword at best, or is just something that is a placeholder anyways. The ammunition here could also point towards some sort of combo. So rather than actually being ammunition, it could be something that is just stored and can be used. Kind of like Susanoo's one, which has multiple parts where you can choose to interrupt the combo at any time. Or from other games, you, for example, have Riven, who has an ability similar to that, which has multiple swings, but you can choose not to do all of them or can chain something else in between. And if you have used your ultimate before, then the ability is a little bit different and has a longer range and stuff like that. The ability now also has a cripple. I could imagine that this cripple isn't necessarily always applied, but only under certain circumstances when you have these specific parts of the ability hit, if it has multiple parts. Or it could just be an easily applicable cripple, and then you chain it over into the one of the other stance for the slow. His second ability in normal stance has multiple hits as well, so this could again be one of those combo abilities. Otherwise, we don't really know much about how it works other than the fact that it has a target lock, potentially. His ability 2 in Spartan stance, however, is a charge, again with multiple hits, and this has a shoulder hit effect and a jab and trail effect. This, again, sounds very much like the melee combo, more than the first ability even, but both of these seem to have some complex attack animations to them, so it might just be that he has multiple melee combos that cover a bit of distance or hit the enemy in multiple ways. This ability right now also has a cripple. I imagine that not both abilities are actually going to end up with a cripple, but rather that Hi-Rez is currently testing which ability works better with the cripple, and then we'll choose if one of the abilities gets a cripple in order to have some sort of balance and see where the CC is. Or for example, if you front load all the CC on one ability, it can sometimes be detrimental for the character because he can't split the CC and has to use it all at once, but it may be interrupted. The third ability in the normal stance has a damage radius and range, so it's probably a ranged attack on an area, maybe also some sort of leap on an area. The ability has different states: strike, spin, and inactive, and there are effects for all of them and a ground targeter. The strike attack is going to be a linear target attack, and then there's a charge forward. After the strike attack is done, you charge forward. Again, this seems to be a bit of a repeating pattern here. This also seems to be an attack that has multiple parts to it and seems to chain multiple things together, as you have that charge forward after a strike is done. The third ability in the Spartan stance is a hit pulse, apparently similar to Freya's 2, so maybe you can like toggle it somehow or something, but I doubt there's going to be a toggle and a stance swap in the same character, and it has a visual effect from a whirlwind trail. His fourth ability is still listed with 3 stances, though I think 2 of them could easily just be the same one with different parts. First stance is a thrust hit, the second stance is a flurry FX, and the third stance is a ground target, which will stop on the first guard hit. It's interesting that he even has that many abilities, because somewhere the stance swap has to come in, though this could be a stance swap similar to Kukulin, where you don't actually have a normal swap in that sense. Another new note for him is Ultimate Arrow. I highly doubt that Arthur will actually have some sort of bow or crossbow, because nothing in his model points toward that right now, and it would be really weird when he's more of this melee frontlining berserker style character, so I doubt this is a literal arrow. It might be some sort of arrow projectile coming from his sword, because it is a glowing sword after all, but it could also just be something that's a bit baiting or misleading or left over from Uller maybe, because there is also a note for range skills rated arrow, and that again is Uller, so there are just some remnants of other gods that kind of maybe helped when building his kit. As I said before, still a lot of question marks surrounding his kit, but we get a little bit more of a picture of him being somebody who seems to have a lot of combos and certain CCs tied to those, and that's going to be very interesting. The other god we'll look at here is Merlin. Now Merlin is still a while away, and he is going to be very complex because he has those 3 stances of Fire, Frost, and Arcane. Right now they are titled differently though. They are apparently titled Minor, Major, and Champion. So this may just be to hide which stance is actually what from data miner specifically. So you have those 3 types, and those will be referred to as A, B, and C. A is Minor, B is Major, and C is Champion. It doesn't necessarily mean that this will be a seamless stance swap between all 3 stances. It could, for example, be that there's a base form that Merlin is normally in, say for example Arcane, and then under certain conditions he can swap either to Fire or to Frost, or either of those if you can choose them at that point. So it may be something that's not as simple as swapping from stance 1 to 2 to 3. Apparently each stance will have a unique passive, but what we know about those passives so far is only that there will be some sort of charged buff. Let's go through the first stance, being minor first. The first ability has a targeter and projectile. Doesn't really tell us much. He's a mage, so probably true for most of his abilities. The second one has a burn effects and deployable. That means that this is probably the fire stance. The third ability has a targeter FX, and the fourth ability has a targeter FX, explosion, and trigger implosion. So again, indications towards the fire stance. Just a lot of fiery things going on here. The interesting thing is that the abilities in Major also again point towards fire. So maybe these are different test versions, or maybe the Arcane stance implements some sort of fire as well, or the placeholders in that stance are also called fire or burn, because it's somewhat similar in terms of the effects between fire and Arcane abilities. The first ability in stance 2 is something with a burn effect, a channel effect, a hit effect, and a mark effect. So it seems like it's some sort of channeled fire ability, maybe some sort of beam or some sort of AoE ability. The second ability has a projectile and comes with a debuff. It has a flame and a hit, as well as a deployable that can be destroyed. You can place up to 2 deployables and it can somehow mark up to 32 targets. It has a left and right position and a damage radius. So it seems to be that it's something you can place somewhere and has some sort of radius and affects targets somehow. Very chaotic. Again, maybe some sort of fire area damage coming from the ground that can be attacked to avoid the damage, but also very, very hard to guess without further information. The third ability doesn't have any information at all, and the fourth ability only has that it has a burn effect. And that brings us to the third stance, the champion stance. With champion stance, the first ability has a projectile with an AoE effect and a special hit, as well as target and impact. The second ability has a deployable, hit, and a slow. The third ability has no information, and the fourth ability just has information that it's a slow. So I think this stance is most likely the frost stance, as you have multiple slows in this stance and you don't have any burn effects, and you have some impact effect as well, which will very well go along with some sort of frost ice thing. And then last but not least, there is a separate ability, which is just called Ability 2, Wizard Arcane Pulse. This also has a slow and some sort of deployable. So maybe this is actually relating to the third stance, and the stance that we're looking at, despite having 2 slows, is actually not the frost stance, but the Arcane stance. Arcane Pulse sounds very interesting. It reminds me actually of some World of Warcraft abilities and AoE ability that we had there. So that would be really cool. That's all we have for Merlin right now. Still not that much information, mostly just visual effects that we can kind of like guesstimate from a little bit what things could become, but really nothing all too in-depth yet. And that's it for this video. Thanks to Smite Data Mining for providing us with this information. And if you enjoyed this and you found this information useful, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell. It really helps me out. Other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.